the hollow beneath. Eldermore village rested at the bottom of a valley where sunlight clung reluctantly to the hillside. Cobblestone streets unrolled like arteries along lines of crooked stone cottages, their thatched roofs drooping with age. Beyond the village, at the border where forests started to creep forward, the village rested beside an ancient well. The rocks were charred, their surfaces burned with some long-forgotten fire, and the mouth of the well yawned like a dark circle that devoured light itself. The villagers referred to it as the Whispering Well, but no one could tell why. No one ever used it for a draught of water. No one ever looked into its depths. And yet, no one ever filled it in, covered it over, because the village was scared of what that would do to its voice. Clara Merton, a troublesome teenager with eyes far too curious for her own good, had always been fascinated by the well. Unlike other children, who fled from its dark shape, taunting each other to throw pebbles into its mouth, Clara viewed it differently. To her, it was not a danger but a mystery, a secret that the village had buried and forgotten. Her father, a serious man who toiled on the fields, forbade her from approaching it. Her mother, weak and superstitious, clutched a pendant of woven plants whenever Clara spoke of it. But their warnings only strengthened her fascination. One chilly evening late in the fall, with the air charged with the smell of dampened leaves, Clara slipped out of her cottage. The moon hung low, a sickle shape of silver that cast spiky shadows across the village. Clara had on her brother's old, oversized coat, and carried a lantern that danced with each burst of wind. The well was where she was headed, as had been on her mind since the day before. She had overheard old man Harrow at the market, a shaking voice telling of odd noises at the well at night. Noises that sounded like voices, he claimed, although not human. Clara's heart had pounded at the sound of the words. She had to know. The forest rose up before her as she walked, the trunks of the trees leaning inward as though keeping the well's secrets. The light from the lantern did not penetrate far into the shadows, and with each step, the air turned colder. When she came to the well, its presence bore down on her, heavy and living. The rocks were slippery with moss, and the area surrounding it was abnormally barren, as though nothing could find sustenance in its shade. Clara placed the lantern on the ground and kneeled, her breathing catching as she leaned over the lip. The darkness on the other side was complete, a nothingness that stared back at her. She listened, her head cocked, straining for the noises Harrow had mentioned. There was only the rustle of the leaves and the faraway owl at first, and then, softly, it grew near, low, repeating, a muted chant of some long-forgotten tongue. It was not a sound, not really, but it had a weight that made her skin crawl. The murmur swelled, grew clearer, till it had wrapped around her, dragging her toward the brink. Clara clutched the rocks tightly with her hands, her body shaking. She yearned to flee, but her curiosity anchored her. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Murmuring ceased. The weight that came after was heavier than any noise, bearing down on her chest so she could hardly get a breath of air. Then, deep from within, a single sound was uttered, a voice neither male nor female, either old nor young. "Clara." Her voice carried up from the well, distinct and firm, as though the shadows themselves had spoken. Clara staggered back, her lantern tilting and going out as the light died. Only moonlight illuminated her way now, and it showed her something previously unnoticed. The well stones bore symbols, worn and weak, that curled downwards into the shadows. They looked as though they breathed, their forms writhing in her eyesight. Her heart raced as she leaped to her feet. The air near the well had transformed, becoming heavy and stifling, like the prelude to a tempest. Clara turned to run, but the soil beneath her feet gave way, a low vibration building from the ground. The well had awakened, and it was wrathful. Clara fled, gasping for air, the forest surrounding her with branches that caught on her coat and the sound of a cold, mirthless laughter carried on the wind behind her to the village. When Clara came to her cottage, she slammed the doors shut and collapsed onto the floor, her body shuddering. Her parents slept, oblivious to her disappearance, and the house creaked around her with the only sound being the groan of the floorboards. She tried to tell herself it had been her mind playing tricks on her, that the well had not called her name. The recollection of that voice, however, stuck with her, clear and irrefutable. She found a candle and sat at the kitchen table, her hands shaking as she replicated the symbols she had seen in her head. They were nothing she had ever seen before, not the runes of her storybooks nor the alphabet of her textbooks. They were older, weirder, and they seemed to squirm on her page. Clara avoided the well the next morning. She stayed near home with her mother, tending to chores and avoiding the questions that were being raised by her father's eyes. But the village had changed. There was a heavier air, a longer shadow, and the villagers went about their lives as though carrying a weight they could not define. Old man Harrow died that day, his body fallen across a chair beside the fire. The healer claimed that his heart had failed him, but Clara caught whispers of other things, telltale marks on his skin, small and coiling, much like the markings on the well. Clara's fear increased, but so did her determination. The well was no longer a mystery, it was a danger, and she had awakened it. She spent the day at the village library, a small room packed with old books and forgotten records. She looked for any mention of the well, its history, its function. None of the books were helpful, full of harvest records and family histories. But hidden beneath a stack of rotting maps, at the back of a corner, she came across a journal, its cover worn and its pages yellowed. It belonged to a scholar named Elias Varn, who had lived a century earlier in Eldermore. The journal mentioned the well, but not by its name. It was the hollow beneath for Elias, a portal to a realm older than the world itself. It had mentioned voices that communicated through dreams, symbols that seared themselves into the brain. The villagers also had feared it, but they had kept it a secret, the warnings being transmitted from generation to generation. Elias had attempted to study it, to comprehend what its power was, but the later pages had turned out to be frantic writings, full of drawings of the same symbols Clara had seen. The final page had contained only a sentence, written with shaking ink, "It knows my name." Clara snapped the journal shut, her heart pounding in her chest. The well had addressed itself to Elias, just as it had addressed her. And Harrow was dead, with the same markings on him. She longed to warn someone, to tell the village, but whom would they ever believe her? The grown-ups pushed the well aside as a superstition, and the other children were too scared to hear her out. She was on her own, caught up in a web of her own making due to her own curiosity. That evening, while the village rested, Clara stayed awake, the journal tucked under her pillow. Outside there was a restless wind that rattled the shutters, and she half heard the murmurs once again, weak and far off. She gripped the pendant that her mother had provided her with, a plain pendant of woven herbage, and mouthed a prayer that she did not truly believe in. But the noise grew nearer, so that it sounded as though it were inside her own walls. "Clara," it said once again, and on its own this time. But soon other voices joined, a collection of whispers that overlapped and interwove, repeating words she couldn't decipher. The air turned cold, and the shadows within her room began to move, taking on forms that weren't quite human. Clara clamped her eyes shut, demanding it to desist, but the voices only intensified, became more demanding. And then, out of darkness, a hand touched her hand. Her skin was cold underneath the touch, cold like the touch of frost on her skin, and she was startled upright in bed. The room was dark, the candle danced out long ago, and heavy air hung heavy in the room, the walls seeming to hold their breath. Her heart was pounding as she pulled her hand back to her chest and looked into the shadows, watching for movement. Nothing happened. The whispers had ceased, leaving a still so deep that it was unnatural. The feeling remained, a tingling that had happened where she had been touched, and she was sure that she had not made a mistake. Clara brought a new candle to life, her shaking fingers as she ignited the match. The light danced across the room, illuminating her familiar space. The wooden bed, her mother-made quilt, the desk covered with books. All was as it was supposed to be, and it was not quite right, as if the room was a facade masking something beneath it. She looked at her hand, turning it back and forth over the light. There, on the back of her wrist, was a mark, a lone, spiral symbol, no bigger than a coin, incised into her skin like a scar. It was the same as the well carvings. She hedged a breath, and rubbed at the mark with her thumb, praying it was dirt or ink. But it did not go away. It became a part of her, as solid as the fear coiling in the pit of her stomach. It made her remember Old Man Harrow, and the rumors associated with the marks on his skin, and a shiver went over her. The well had touched her, not just with its voice but with some kind of material touch, some kind that could touch and imprint and own her. Clara did not sleep much that evening, her mind full of questions she had no answers to. At dawn, gray and pale from her window, she put on her clothes and covered the mark with her sweater sleeve. She could not tell her mother and father about it. Her father would tell her it was a foolish fancy, and her mother would be frantic, mumbling prayers and burning incense. Clara decided instead to go back to the library. Her reading of Elias Varn's journal had opened her eyes to a reality, and she wanted to know more. The village was solemn that morning, the streets unusually quiet. Clara observed how people avoided glancing at the forest, their eyes flicking away from the direction of the well. Down at the market, vendors spoke softly, their voices falling silent when she approached. She overheard snippets of their speech: another death, a farmer found dead within his barn, his body covered with peculiar marks. The healer was stumped, the elders were gathering, and fear was spreading like an illness. The library was deserted when Clara came, its air heavy with the smell of paper and damp. She pulled out Elias's journal from its secret location, and started reading where she had left reading. The scholar's prose became more desperate, speaking of a great, dark space beneath the ground, where voices conversed as one and shadows moved with intent. He spoke of the marked, those whom the hollow beneath had chosen, who carried its markings and were compelled toward its call. A thread in a brocade the well was spinning, each marked one, he said, for a purpose he could not guess. Her hand shook when she turned the pages of the journal. Her wrist mark throbbed, a slight heat that made her skin crawl. There was a sketch within the journal, a diagrammatic drawing of the well markers, and she compared them to the mark on her skin. They were the same, even to the minutest curve. There were passages from Elias, descriptions of people during his time who had carried the marks, village people who had gone missing or turned up dead, their bodies drained of color, as though devoured from the inside out. She shut the journal and pressed her palms to her face, attempting to calm her breathing. The well was not only an area, it was a living, thinking thing that had selected her for some unknown purpose. But why had it done so? She was ordinary, a question asker, nothing else. The mere notion of facing it once again paralyzed her with fear, but the other option, doing nothing, letting the well take her, was far worse. That afternoon, Clara approached the village elders with the hope they could tell her something about the history of the well. They were seated at the meeting hall, a stone building with a sloping roof. Inside, the air was heavy with tension, and the 5 men and women with worn faces eyed her suspiciously. Speaking warily, omitting any mention of her mark, she asked them about the well, telling them she had heard odd tales. The oldest of them, a woman with eyes the color of rough-hewn flint, looked at Clara for a long time. "The well predates Eldamore," she said eventually, her tone low and measured. It was there even before the village, before the forest, before the valley itself. Our people constructed around it, because they had no choice, not because they desired to. It won't allow you to escape. Clara pushed for more, but the elder women's responses became evasive, and the other elders said nothing at all. They talked of ancient warnings, of ceremonies to keep the well muted, but said nothing specific. Clara departed the hall with the elder's watchful eyes on the back of her head, keen and knowing. The elder had seen something within her, Clara was certain of that, and the realization unsettled her to her core. That evening, the whispers came back. They started while Clara was getting ready for bed, a low humming that sounded as though it was emanating from the walls themselves. Clara stilled, her candle casting eerie shadows that swirled across the room. The voices became louder, calling her name in a song that was at once lovely and awful. Clara, they called, come to us. The mark on her wrist stung, a sharp searing pain that made her catch her breath. Clara pulled her sleeve up and discovered that the symbol had increased, its lines spreading farther across her skin, curled like tendrils. She staggered to the window, trying for a slap of fresh air to clear her head, but the village outside was askew. The moon was darker, the shadows taller, and the air had a smell like damp and rotting earth. At a distance, where the forest gave way to the village, she spotted a move, tall, thin, standing near the forest's border. It was far enough that she couldn't discern much, but its head was turned toward her, as the whispers grew louder and the figure moved a step out from where it started, jerky and unnatural. Clara slammed the shutters shut and stepped back, her heart pounding. She snatched up the journal and turned to a page she had previously read quickly, one that mentioned the guardians of the well. Elias had also seen them, beings that were not human, that moved at night and protected the secrets of the well. They were bound to the hollow beneath, he had thought, extensions of its own will, who had come to observe the marked ones. Her wrist pain dissipated, yet the mark spread on, its lines branching up her forearm half its length. Clara realized she couldn't wait any longer. The well was taking a tighter hold, and the village was no longer a safe distance from it. She had to decipher the symbols, find out what the well wanted, before it took her for good. As she rested, the candle flickering low, Clara made a choice. The next day, she would go back to the well, no longer as a curious child but as one prepared to battle. She would take the journal, a knife from the kitchen drawer, and all her courage that she could find within her. The whispers trailed behind her as she slept, threading themselves into her dreams, and within them, she envisioned the well's depths, great, hollow emptiness where something old lay sleeping, waiting for her to tumble in. Clara awoke to a world that seemed to be worn thin, as though the material of reality had thinned in spots. The sunlight was muted, filtered through a heavy blanket of cloud cover, and the air in her bedroom had a slight, damp chill to it. She glances at her wrist at once, bracing for what she would see. The mark had not expanded, but its lines were darker, inscribed deep into her skin like a branding mark. She touched them with her finger, a slight pulse beating beneath it, as though the symbol had a pulse of its own. Her determination of the night before remained, though fear nibbled at its borders. Clara put on layers, wrapping her brother's jacket around her for protection and grit, and tucked Elias Varn's journal into her bag. The kitchen knife, its edge worn and honed, went into her pocket, a tiny source of reassurance against the unknown. Her parents had already left, her father to the fields, her mother to the marketplace, and Clara was glad they had. She did not want to answer their questions, not when hers were so burdensome. The village was quieter than usual, its roads almost deserted. The handful of villagers she encountered scurried past her, their eyes cast down, as though they were not supposed to catch her eye. Clara couldn't help but wonder, did they feel it too, increasing pressure in the atmosphere, the shadows that impossibly clung on a little longer? She took a circuitous road to the forest, avoiding main routes and hoping to go unnoticed. The well was beckoning her, not with a call but with a draw that reached deep into her bones, a draw as insistent as the pull of gravity. The forest was not the same today. The trunks of the trees rose straight from the ground, their branches creating a canopy that filtered much of the light. The ground was damp, squelchy, and each step Clara took sank a little into it. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth, and only occasionally was there a snap of a branch or a rustle of leaves to disturb the stillness. Clara gripped the journal hard with a hand, its weight anchoring her as she approached the well. When she came to it, the whispering well appeared to be bigger, the stones taller. The symbols carved on them were sharper, clearer, their lines defined and bright, as though they had just been carved. Clara kneeled, being careful not to touch the stone, and laid out Elias's drawings from the journal. They were shown alongside the carvings, and Clara observed that they had a similarity so unnerving in their resemblance. The journal had called the signs a language, one older than mankind, spoken by whatever lived within the hollow beneath. Elias had thought them a key, but he could not say what they opened. Clara's mark tingled as she gazed at the glyphs, a pain that was pleasurable and compelling at the same time. She breathed deep and leaned over the lip of the well, her lantern dark to keep from being seen. The darkness beneath was as complete as before, but she could see wispy glows within it, stars on a distant horizon of a dark sky. The whispers started, low and song-like, wrapping around her like smoke. They said her name, but there were other things also, broken and unintelligible, like shards of a melody she had not heard. She withdrew the knife from her pocket, its blade shining with a faint light, and balanced it over the well. "I am not yours," she said, her voice shaking but unyielding. The whispers ceased, and the air chilled, heavy on her skin. The glows in the depths of the well throbbed, and Clara felt a pull, one that was not physical but one that went on inside, where something reached for her soul. And there, glinting as it shifted back from her, was a shape, too large to be human, its contours flowing like the surface of a liquid. It was not climbing but rising, attracted by her own form. Clara's heart was pounding, and she retreated, letting go of the knife so that it fell with a clatter on the stone and plunged into the well, its sound lost into the emptiness. The whispers began again, their sound rising, and the shape drew nearer, its form coalescing into something almost recognizable, a face, or the outline of a face, with eyes glowing like embers. Clara ran with the forest seeming to conspire against her, its branches catching at her coat, its roots tripping at her feet. The whispers trailed after her, still resonant inside her mind, and the mark on her wrist burned hot. She did not halt till she came to the village, her breath ragged, her body shaking. The streets were empty once again, the cottages unlit, and the air was heavy with a stillness that was like a pre-storm calm. She hid in the library, blocking the door with a chair and collapsing onto the floor with the journal. Shaking, she opened it, hoping to find something that would make what she had seen make sense. Elias had written of the guardians of the well, but this was something different, something bigger, something older. This he referred to as the Watcher, a being that resided at the center of the hollow beneath, holding the marked ones within its thrall. They who had seen it, he had written, were never the same. Some went mad. Others ceased to exist. Clara's mark was spreading once more, its lines coiling about her elbow. She pressed her palm against it, hoping to stem the ache, but it grew only sharper. The journal provided no answers, only cautions, and Clara bore the brunt of her own inadequacy. She refused to combat the well, not by her own strength, not with knife or book or obdurate heart. But she refused to give up either. That night, when the village cowered in terror, Clara formulated a plan. She would seek out those who had seen the well, who had seen its signs or heard its whispers. Marian, the elder, came to mind first. The woman had spoken with a weight, a knowledge she had not yet revealed. Clara would seek her out, ask questions, and assemble the truth before the well engulfed her completely. As the evening darkened, the whispers grew louder and more demanding. Clara turned on all of the library candles, their light casting a gossamer circle. Clara sat with the journal, transcribing the symbols onto a piece of scrap paper, intent on deciphering a meaning for them. The air chilled, and the shadows outside the light of the candles appeared to throb, as though the reach of the well had come with her. And then she heard it, a knock on the door of the library, slow and deliberate. Her heart had paused. The village was sleeping, and no one had any idea that she was there. The knock came again, heavier, and the door groaned, like something was sensing its solidity. Clara gripped the journal, her own eyes on the door, and mouthed a prayer for courage. It ceased knocking, but the quiet was worse. She sensed the watcher, not outside but within the air, within her mark, within her head. The candles danced and the shadows shifted, taking on forms that did not belong to people. Clara gasped as one of the shadows separated from the wall, its shape tall and lean, reminiscent of that form at the forest edge. It did not utter a sound, but its eyes, two blazing spots of light, locked onto her. The journal slipped from her fingers, its pages fanning across the floor. The shadow moved a step closer, and Clara cried out, her scream resounding deep within the deserted library. The candles went out. Darkness engulfed the library, heavy and stifling, as though the air itself had solidified. Clara's scream remained within her head, but the darkness was gone. The candles were strewn about, their wicks extinguished, and the pages of the journal were scattered on the floor like fallen leaves. Her heart thumped, each pulse reminding her of the eyes of the shadow, those burning spots that had watched her, recognized her. Fumbling for a match, her shaking fingers dropped it twice before lighting a light. The light was feeble, but it cast enough light on her to prove that she was alone. At least for the moment. She gathered the pages of the journal, her shaking fingers repairing them piece by piece. The mark on her arm ached, its lines spreading past her elbow, wrapping around her arm like vines. It was pulling her towards something she could not define, transforming her. The shadow had not attacked, but it had shown her its threat, hinted at what the well could accomplish. Clara required answers, and she required them immediately. Her only hope was Marian, the village elder. The woman's mysterious comment concerning the well had promised knowledge, a history that the village had hidden. Clara stayed till dawn, when a light began to seep into the windows of the library, before she left. The village was a husk of itself, its streets deserted, its cottages unoccupied. The air was heavy with the smell of rot, and the forest crouched at the border of Eldermore, its trees standing sentinel. Marian's cottage occupied the center of the village, a low stone structure with a shingled roof covered with moss. Clara knocked on the door, her knuckles banging out a loud rhythm on the worn door. No response. A second, harder knock, and she called out Marian's name. The quiet grew, interrupted only by the slight creak of the door opening, untethered. Clara stayed her step, her instincts screaming at her to go back, but the mark on her arm throbbed, compelling her on. Inside, the cottage was dark, its atmosphere heavy with the smell of old wood and herbs. There was simple furnishings, a chair, a table, a hearth with glowing embers, everything minimal and unadorned. Marian sat at the back of the cottage, back to the wall, her gaze on Clara. The elder woman had a drawn face, her arms folded tightly on her lap, and Clara caught a look on her face that made her insides knot, fear, unbridled and unshielded. "You shouldn't have come," Marian said, her tones strained and low-pitched. "The well has seen you now." Clara advanced, holding the journal close. I have to know about it, she said. The hollow below, the symbols, the markings. You know something that you have not said to me. Marian's gaze darted to Clara's arm, where the elbow had slipped, exposing the swirling mark. The older woman gasped, rising quickly, her movements swift for her years. Seizing Clara's wrist, her grip hard as steel, she gazed at the mark. It is too late, she breathed. You are bound to it. Clara pulled her arm loose, wrath flaring up from fear. Tell me what it wants, she commanded. Why is it marking people? Why me? Marian leaned back into her chair, her fingers shaking. The well is not an object, she said. It is a door, a crack within the world. A long time ago, before Eldermore, something was shut up under this valley, older than the stars themselves. The signs are its language, its intent. Those who wear them are its keys, destined to open the door or shut it. Clara's mind was spinning, reconciling Marian's statements with the contents of Elias's journal. A door to what, she wondered. Marian's eyes went dark. To the hollow below, she said. A realm where light cannot penetrate, where time is non-existent. The entity that resides there is not a god, nor is it a demon, but something else, something that feeds on the world that was denied it. The marked are its path back. Clara shivered with a chill that went deeper than the cold of the cottage. And the guardians, she wondered, recalling the figure at the edge of the forest, the shape in the library? They serve, Marian said. They observe the marked, see that they serve their purpose. Some rebel, as did Elias Varn. Others capitulate. None get out. Her throat constricted. She was thinking of Harrow, of the farmer, of the scars on their bodies. Am I going to die? She whispered, her voice a mere breath of air. Marian turned her head, her muteness a response. Then she rose and walked to a wooden trunk at the back of the room. She opened the trunk, which had a stratum of what appeared to be yellowed, brittle papers inside, bound with twine. These are the accounts of the marked, she said. We choose a few from each generation. We attempted to halt it, rituals, sacrifices, but the well has a way of finding its way. She took the papers, her shaking with her hands. Why did you not burn it? She demanded. Destroy it, burn the forest, flood the well? Marian laughed harshly. You really believe that we have not made the effort? The well cannot be destroyed. It is not stone and dirt. It is a part of here, a part of us. They who attempted it paid a price. Clara mouthed a question, but a noise stopped her, a low, repeating murmur, similar to the whispers from the well. It was outside, rising and growing, thrumming the air with a pressure that weighed on her chest. Marian's face went white, and she caught at Clara's arm. Go, she breathed fiercely. Now. Clara emerged from the cottage, the papers clutched tightly against her chest. The village was askew, its hues dull, its shadows stretching elongatedly on the ground. The whispers trailed after her, winding along the streets, and she caught glimpses of figures at the periphery of her vision, tall, gaunt forms that shifted with a stiff gait. The guardians. Clara ran, her boots thudding on the cobblestones, until she reached her cottage door. She slammed the door shut and unrolled the papers on the table. They were letters, diaries, shreds of lives that had transpired because of the well. They each said the same, a symbol only they could see, whispers at midnight, shadows that watched them. Some struggled, some ran, but they each ended similarly, death or vanishing. There was a single letter, scrawled by a child, that spoke of a dreamscape of the hollow beneath, a huge nothing that the watcher haunted, its eyes burning coals. Clara's mark seared itself along her skin, and she tugged up her sleeve. The mark had traveled up to her shoulder, its lines softly glowing with a light from within. The whispers grew louder, and the air became heavier inside the cottage, the shadows coalescing in the corners. She plunged the journal and papers into her satchel. She could not remain there, not with the guardians on her trail. As she emerged outside, the village had vanished. The cottages, the streets, the sky, everything had turned into a gray, shapeless expanse. Everything except for the forest, which rose up around her like giants from a fairy tale, and at its center the well, its rocks glowing with light. Clara's mark blazed with an intense light, and the whispers grew to a chant that beckoned her onward. She walked, her legs propelling her against her will, her knife forgotten in her pocket. Only the well remained, its mouth open and hungry. The guardians were at its edge, their bodies clearer, tall, gaunt, with faces that weren't faces, their eyes staring at her. Clara's mark blazed a fire within her, burning her, and she could feel the watcher's presence, huge and unrelenting, from the depths. She halted at the rim of the well, her body shaking. The journal fell from her fingers, its sheets fluttering into the shadows. The whispers called her name, and the guardians grasped at her, their hands icy and unyielding. She shut her eyes, and the world receded from her. Clara did not fall, but her feet slipped from beneath her as the ground gave way. The air was cold and heavy, lying on her skin like water, and the whispers closed in on her, a symphony that filled her head. The mark on her burned, its light beating with the rhythm of the symbols on the well, which glowed on her mind's eye even deep within the darkness. She was no longer within the walls of Eldamore, no longer on the world she had always known. She was within the hollow beneath, which was full of life. Her eyes grew accustomed to the dim light, showing her a huge, cavernous area. The walls, if walls there were dark and smooth, like polished black stone, inscribed with the same spiral patterns that covered her own skin. They had a light that glowed softly, which did not shine but darkened the shadows even further. The floor was uneven, strewn with jagged rocks that shifted beneath her feet, and the air had a smell of old rot, like soil untroubled by time. Her satchel was missing, along with her journal and Marian's papers, but the mark on her arm shone with a different light, its curves wrapping around her arm and spreading across her chest. It was a part of her now, a map that directed her onward, pulling her further into the hollow space. She struggled to turn back, to head the other way, but there was no back, only ahead, into the whispers. Their guardians were present, their gaunt, emaciated bodies gliding silently on the periphery of her line of sight. They touched her not at all, but their presence weighed heavy, a constant reminder that she was bound. Their eyes blazed, two sparks of light within eyes which were not eyes, and Clara could feel their stares like a knife cutting against her skin. She ached to scream, to struggle, but her body walked as though spurred, her feet keeping a steady gait amid her heart heaving with fear. Whispers grew into discernible words, almost comprehensible to her. They talked of hunger, of patience, of a world that had moved on without them. Clara's mark trembled with each of them, and she could feel the watcher out there, huge and old, beyond some point ahead. It was not a being, not as she conceived of being, but a presence, a will that predated the creation of the world. And it wanted her. She walked for hours, the cavern stretching out before her, the walls shoving against her, and pulling back again like a living breath. The symbols burned with a fierce light, their radiance illuminating shapes in the black, figures, human and otherwise, caught in attitudes of suffering or defeat. They were the marked ones, Clara understood, those who had preceded her, their bodies locked within the hollow's grasp. Some were recent, their uniforms torn but still readable. Others were old, their forms hardly human, their marks glowing softly in the darkness. Clara's throat constricted, but she moved on, propelled by the mark and the whispers. She walked past a body she recognized, Old Man Harrow, racked with fear, with symbol-splashed skin. A farmer lay close by, as though he had attempted to flee. And in the darkness was the journal-clutched form of Elias Varn, dead eyes wide with horror. Clara's heart hurt, but she could not cease. The watcher called to her. The cave opened into a huge room, its roof lost to shadows, its floor a polished expanse of dark stone. There was a pool at its center, its surface unbroken and reflective, a mirror of dark water. The whispers began there, building to a crescendo that shivered the air. Clara's mark was aflame now, its light lighting the room, and she could see the markings on the walls writhing, living things that moved. She walked toward the pool, her face reflected back at her, but not her own face. It was older, gaunt, with eyes that blazed like the guardian's. The mark enveloped her completely, its lines glowing against her skin, and she could feel the watchers were nudging against her own, telling her to kneel, to yield. No, Clara replied, weak but resolute. I am not yours. The whispers laughed, their echoes within her bones, and the pool of water rippled. A shape from its depths arose, enormous and shapeless, its borders morphing like smoke. The watcher. Eyes that were present everywhere burned within the shadows, and its being was a pressure that squashed air from Clara's lungs. It was within her mind, seeking, claiming, offering her a seat at its endless hunger. Clara's mark flared hotter, her will failing her, her body drawn toward the pool. The guardians approached, their hands extended, their eyes never leaving hers. She caught visions of the world above, Eldermore destroyed, the forest engulfing the village, the sky darkening as the hollow beneath came up to reclaim it all. But within Clara, something began to come back to life, a fire of rebellion, stoked by the image of her family, her village, the life she had left behind. She recalled Elias, who had struggled to the last breath, Marion, who had guarded the village secrets. She was more than a key, more than a strand in the Watcher's fabric. She was Clara Merton, and she would not fall. She cried out as she ripped at the symbol on her arm, her fingernails scraping into her skin. Blood welled up, but the mark did not disappear. The Watcher laughed harder, and the guardians closed around her, their hands feeling like ice. Clara struggled, her eyes blurring, and glimpsed the pool approaching, its surface greedy and infinite. And she recalled the knife, the one that had fallen into the well. It was gone, but the memory gave her courage. She concentrated on it, on the shape of its handle, on the decision it symbolized. I am not yours, she shouted, and the area sounded like a knife cutting through the whispers. The Watcher stuttered, its shape blurring, and the guardians relaxed their hold. Clara staggered back, her mark thinning, her will her own once more. The pool churned turbulently, and the wall symbols flickered, their light dwindling. The chamber trembled, rocks from the hidden ceiling crashing to the ground, and Clara fled, the guardian's eyes blazing behind her. She did not know where she was heading, only that she had to get away from there. The cavern turned, the walls converging on her, but Clara pushed on, her breathing rough, her heart beating hard. The whispers trailed behind, lessened, and the mark on her arm began to cool, its lines marring her skin less distinctly. Light showed itself in the distance, a weak, faraway glow, and Clara moved toward it, her body hurting. The guardians had vanished, the Watcher's essence receding, but she understood it was far from finished. The hollow beneath would not release her so quickly. She came out into the forest, the well behind her, the rocks quiet. The village was there, unmoving, as if no time had elapsed at all. Clara dropped to her knees, her body shaking, and gazed at her arm. The mark was still present, but smaller, the lines thin. She was free, at least for the moment. But the whispers remained within her thoughts, and the well looked on, patiently waiting for her return. The painted door. Clara feared enclosed spaces. The way they trapped her made her feel buried. At 28, she thought she'd mastered it, but the room at the end of her new apartment's hallway proved her wrong. The apartment was a bargain, a third-floor unit in the old part of Varnell, its walls thick, its windows small. The landlord had skipped the room during the tour, saying it was storage, locked for safety. But Clara found the door on her first day, its surface painted with a swirling pattern, like eyes. She moved in alone, fresh from a breakup, needing a new start. The apartment was cozy, its rooms bright, but the hallway was long, the door at its end always in view. The paint was fresh, the swirls gleaming, the air around it heavy with the scent of linseed oil and something sharp, like blood. Clara tried the knob, but it was locked, the key missing. She asked the landlord, who laughed it off, saying, "Old buildings, odd rooms. Leave it be." On her third night, unable to sleep, Clara heard it, a scratching, faint but deliberate, coming from the door. She checked, flashlight in hand, but the hallway was empty, the door still. The scratching grew louder, joined by a whisper, not words but her name, spoken in a voice that wasn't human. She locked her bedroom door, but the whispering followed, seeping through the walls, urging her to the room. By morning, Clara noticed marks on her hands, thin, red lines, like brushstrokes, forming swirls, like the door's paint. They weren't there yesterday. She scrubbed them, but they didn't fade, they deepened, as if painted into her skin. The whispering grew louder, the scratching constant, and she saw movement in the hallway, a shadow, human-shaped but wrong, standing before the door. Clara tried to leave, packing a bag, but the apartment's front door wouldn't open, the windows wouldn't break. Her phone was dead, its screen flickering with static that formed swirls, like the door. The whispering became a chant, urging her to the room, to the door. She barricaded the hallway with a chair, but the wood groaned, the paint on the door pulsing, as if alive. Desperate, Clara searched the apartment, finding a diary in a closet, its pages yellowed, written by a tenant named Elias, dated 1963. He wrote of the door as a canvas, a portal to something that paints the self. He described hearing whispers, seeing his face in the paint, feeling his body change. The last entry was a warning. "It knows my name. It wants my colors. Don't open the door." Clara's marks spread, her skin tingling, her fingers trembling. The whispering was in her now, curling through her thoughts, pulling her to the door. She saw her reflection in a window, not her face but Elias's, pale and hollow-eyed, his mouth open in a silent scream. She covered the window, but the reflection lingered, whispering her name. The chair splintered, the door creaking. Clara knew she couldn't stay, but the apartment wouldn't let her go. The whispering became a voice, calling her to the room, promising answers, promising home. Clara's fear was a cage, but the door was the key. The marks on her hands, red, swirling brushstrokes, had spread to her arms, her neck glowing faintly, like wet paint. They moved, curling like the door's pattern, syncing with the whispering that filled the apartment. The scratching was constant, a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, urging her to the room at the hallway's end, to the painted door. She hadn't slept, couldn't eat. The whispering was in her, vibrating through her thoughts, her chest, herself. Her reflection was everywhere, in the glass of a picture frame, the shine of a fork, the surface of a cup, not her face, but Elias's, or something worse, its eyes black, its mouth open, whispering her name. She covered every reflective surface, but the whispering followed, the scratching growing, the marks burning. Clara clutched Elias's diary, its pages her only lifeline. He wrote of the door as a threshold, a canvas that painted the self into something else, something older. He mentioned a way to erase the colors, a ritual involving the brush of will. But the details were vague, the pages stained with red, like the marks on Clara's skin. The last entry was a plea. It sees me. It takes me. Stay away. The whispering surged, the scratching a command. Open. Join. Be. Clara's marks glowed, her skin tingling, her fingers locking. She felt heavy, her breath shallow, as if the paint was inside her, reshaping her. The walls groaned, the floor trembling, and she saw shapes in the shadows, human but wrong, their eyes black, their mouths open, like the door's swirls. Clara tried to fight, barricading the hallway, but the door rattled, the paint pulsing, the wood splintering. She searched the apartment, tearing through closets, finding letters from others, a man in 1912, a woman in 1948, a child in 1989. All spoke of the door, the whispering, the marks. All ended the same. I am its. Clara's fear turned to desperation. She wouldn't be its. She grabbed a knife, its blade dull, and moved the chair, approaching the door. The air was thick, the whispering deafening, the scratching a storm. The door was alive, its paint swirling, its pattern forming eyes, mouths, hands. Clara's reflection was in the paint, not her face but countless faces, their eyes black, their mouths open in hunger. The knife trembled in her hand, but she cut her palm, blood mixing with the marks, the door trembling. The whispering became a scream, and Clara's marks glowed, her body trembling. She saw Elias's face, the others, their eyes pleading, their selves consumed. The door was vast, not a portal but a force, its hunger endless, its canvas eternal. Clara's will burned, fueled by terror, and she pressed her bloody hand to the door, its paint softening, her fingers sinking in. The shadows lunged, their hands cold, their mouths open, pulling her to the door. Clara screamed, the sound her own, and pulled back, the door cracking, the paint peeling, the whispering silenced. She ran, the hallway endless, the apartment shaking, the scratching faint but alive. She reached her bedroom, the door gone, the walls cracked, the shadows watching. The marks remained glowing, pulsing, the door's voice in her chest, calling her back. Clara's body was a canvas, the marks, red, swirling brushstrokes, claiming her skin, her thoughts, herself. They covered her chest, her face, glowing with a wet, relentless light, pulsing with the whispering that shook the apartment. The scratching was a chorus, not just her name but her fears, her regrets, spoken in voices that knew her too well. The door was alive, its paint calling her, its swirls forming eyes, mouths, hands, watching, whispering. She stayed in her bedroom, the hallway a threat, the door's presence seeping through the walls. The whispering was deafening, the air thick with linseed oil and blood, the shadows alive with shapes, human but wrong, their eyes black, their mouths open, like the door's pattern. Clara's reflection was in every surface, the shine of a lamp, the crack of a mirror, the surface of a cup, not her face, but Elias's, or something worse, its eyes hollow, its mouth whispering her name. She reread Elias's diary, its pages crumbling, its words fading. He wrote of the door as a painter, a force that consumed the self, binding it to the canvas. The ritual, the brush of will, required, the color of defiance, but the method was unclear, the pages stained with red. The last entry was a scream. It is me. I am it. Run. The whispering surged, the scratching commanding, open. Join. Be. Clara's marks glowed, her skin tingling, her body heavy. She felt the doors pull, stronger now, urging her to the hallway, to the room. The shadows moved, their hands reaching, their mouths chanting. Clara's was afraid, her thoughts slipping, herself dissolving. She saw her life, her dreams, her failures, her loneliness, fading into the paint. She had to act. She found a paintbrush, its bristles red, hidden in a drawer. She cut her palm again, blood mixing with the marks, and dipped the brush, its bristles softening, glowing faintly. The whispering faltered, the shadows retreating, the marks dimming. The brush was the color of defiance, the ritual's key, but it was weak, its glow fading. The door rattled, the paint pulsing, the scratching a roar. Clara moved, the brush in hand, its glow cutting through the shadows, the whispering fading. The hallway was alive, the door's paint swirling, its pattern forming faces, eyes, mouths. Clara's reflection was in the paint, not her face but countless faces, their eyes black, their mouths open in hunger. The brush trembled in her hand, but she painted over the door, her blood mixing with the swirls, the paint softening, the door trembling. The whispering became a scream, and Clara's marks glowed, her body trembling. She saw Elias's face, the others, their eyes pleading, their selves consumed. The door was endless, its hunger eternal, its canvas a wound that never closed. Clara's were burned, fueled by terror, and she painted, the brush blazing, the shadows crumbling, the door cracking. But the brush's glow faded, the blood spent, the whispering surging. The shadows lunged, their hands cold, their mouths open, pulling her to the door. Clara screamed, the sound her own, and through the brush, its bristles scattering, its glow fading. The door screamed, the shadows dissolving, the whispering silenced. Clara fell, the hallway collapsing, the apartment shaking, the scratching faint but alive. She crawled from the ruin, the door gone, the walls cracked, the shadows watching. The marks remained glowing, pulsing, the door's voice in her chest, calling her back. Clara was losing herself. The marks, red, swirling brushstrokes, covered her body, glowing with a wet, relentless light, pulling her to the door. The brush had saved her, softening the paint, silencing the whispering, but it was gone, its bristles scattered, its glow spent. The scratching was fainter but alive, vibrating in her chest, her thoughts, herself. The shadows returned, soft but insistent, chanting her name, promising peace, promising home. She stayed in the apartment's main room, the hallway a ruin, the door's presence creeping upward. The walls were alive, their cracks forming eyes, mouths, hands, watching, whispering. Her reflection was everywhere, in the shine of a spoon, the crack of a window, the surface of a cup, not her face, but Elias's, or something worse, its eyes black, its mouth open, calling her. Clara covered every surface, but the whispering followed, the scratching growing, the marks burning. She searched Elias's diary, its pages crumbling, its words fading. He wrote of the door as a canvas, a wound that fed on wool, binding the self to the paint. The ritual, the color of defiance, required the brush painted with the light of self. But the method was missing, the pages torn. The last entry was a cry. "It is me. I am it. Run." The whispering surged, the scratching commanding, "Return. Join. Be." Clara's marks glowed, her skin tingling, her body heavy. She felt the doors pull, stronger now, urging her to the hallway, to the room. The shadows moved, their hands reaching, their mouths chanting. Clara's were frayed, her thoughts slipping, herself dissolving. She saw her life, her hopes, her fears, her loneliness, fading into the paint. She had to fight. She found a vial of paint, its color red, hidden in a closet. She cut her palm again, blood mixing with the paint, and dipped her fingers, the liquid softening, glowing faintly. The whispering faltered, the shadows retreating, the marks dimming. The paint was the light of self, the ritual's fuel, but it was small, its glow flickering. The door rattled, the paint pulsing, the scratching a roar. Clara moved, the vial in hand, its glow cutting through the shadows, the whispering fading. The hallway was alive, the door's paint swirling, its pattern forming faces, eyes, mouths. Clara's reflection was in the paint, not her face but countless faces, their eyes black, their mouths open in hunger. The vial trembled in her hand, but she painted over the door, her blood mixing with the paint, the swirls softening, the door trembling. The whispering became a scream, and Clara's marks glowed, her body trembling. She saw Elias's face, the others, their eyes pleading, their selves consumed. The door was endless, its hunger eternal, its canvas a wound that never closed. Clara's were burned, fueled by terror, and she painted, the vial blazing, the shadows crumbling, the door cracking. But the vial's paint ran dry, the blood spent, the whispering surging. The shadows lunged, their hands cold, their mouths open, pulling her to the door. Clara screamed, the sound her own, and through the vial, its glass shattering, its glow fading. The door screamed, the shadows dissolving, the whispering silenced. Clara fell, the hallway collapsing, the apartment shaking, the scratching faint but alive. She crawled from the ruin, the door gone, the walls cracked, the shadows watching. The marks remained glowing, pulsing, the door's voice in her chest, calling her back. Clara thought she'd escaped, but the door never let go. She fled Varnell, settling in a city, far from the apartment, the hallway, the paint. She rented a small studio, its walls bare, its reflective surfaces covered. She worked freelance, avoiding people, avoiding paint. But the marks, red, swirling brushstrokes, remained, glowing faintly, a reminder of the canvas within. The whispering was faint, buried in her chest, but it was there, waking her at night, chanting her name. She didn't tell anyone. The apartment was gone, the door a memory, but the canvas was eternal. She saw it in her dreams, the door, its paint swirling, its pattern alive with eyes, mouths, hands, her face among them, whispering. Her reflection was wrong, even in the matte surfaces of her laptop, her coffee mug, not her face, but Elias's, or something worse, its eyes black, its mouth open, calling. She stopped looking, but the canvas saw her. The studio wasn't safe. Cracks appeared in the walls, thin and curling, forming swirls, eyes, mouths. She painted over them, but they returned, glowing with red, smelling of linseed oil and blood. The whispering grew louder, the scratching clearer. You are ours. You are paint. Clara's marks burned, her skin tingling, her body heavy. She felt the doors pull, even here, thousands of miles away. She tried to fight, searching for answers in libraries, online, in forgotten texts. She found myths, painted thresholds, wounds in the world, feeding on will, binding souls to the canvas. An artist's journal, buried in an archive, spoke of a ritual to erase the canvas, requiring the light of self, a sacrifice of will. Clara had tried, but her will was breaking, the paint creeping inward. The studio shook, the cracks spreading, the shadows screaming. Clara saw them everywhere, in the walls, the ceiling, the floor, her face, whispering, calling, consuming. She ran to the bathroom, the only room without cracks, and locked the door. The sink's faucet gleamed, showing her reflection, not her, but the door's, its swirls alive, its eyes black, its mouth open, beckoning. She smashed the faucet, water spraying, but the reflection remained clearer, closer. The whispering became a chorus, deafening, commanding, be. Clara's marks glowed, her body trembling, her breath catching. She saw the faces, Elias, the others, trapped in the paint, their eyes empty, their selves consumed. She saw the door, not gone but alive, in her, in the city, in the world. The canvas was everywhere, and she was its vessel. Clara's will faltered. She saw her life, her dreams, her fears, her loneliness, dissolving into the paint. The whispering promised peace, but it was a lie. The door didn't free, it consumed. Clara screamed, the sound her own, and ran from the bathroom, the studio a maze of cracks and shadows. The walls pulsed, the faces her, the whispering her own. She left the city, driving aimlessly, the marks glowing, the whispering relentless. She stopped at a roadside motel, its walls bare, its reflective surfaces covered. But the canvas found her. The cracks returned, the shadows clearer, the whispering thicker. Clara knew she couldn't run. The apartment was in her, the door was her, and the canvas was eternal. She stood before a window, the glass uncovered, reflecting the night, the canvas, her. Her reflection was the door, its swirls alive, its pattern her. She pressed her hand to the glass, the marks pulsing, the whispering complete. The ritual hadn't failed, it had claimed her. She painted, not with a brush but with herself, her body fading, her colors dissolving. Months later, a new tenant moved into Clara's studio. They found a painting in the closet, small and swirling, its pattern alive with eyes, mouths, hands. They hung it on the wall, admiring its eerie beauty. That night they heard a whisper, faint and wet, like paint on canvas. They didn't cover it. They didn't know. The canvas was patient, and it knew their name.